everybody, and welcome to Tremco Live, where we're socially distant but technically connected. And I love that intro video with it snowing because it was snowing here today, Paul.
It was really pretty. It's like a snowball.
It is.
Only with XOR 430.
Exactly. It's a perfect backdrop. So once again, I'm Marcy Tyler, the Director of Building Science, and I'm here with my co-host.
And I'm Paul Hugenboom, the President of the Tremco Construction Products Group. Marcy, a tremendous collection of brands, companies, people, product systems, and most of all our friends joining us online today.
Exactly. We got a good group of friends joining us today, so we're pretty excited about that. Kicking off December with a variety of different guests that will be coming on. So definitely stay tuned for the remaining of the month. We have 2 authors and a chance to get both of those books from those authors. So your participation today and in the next 2 Fridays in December will give you a chance to get those signed copies of those books. So we got Craig Stevenson coming on with the book that he wrote, and then also Dr. Joe Stebrick to wrap up our December. So exciting month, and I'm excited to kick it off today as well with our topic.
Yeah. Marcy?
So
I was going to say it's one of my favorite topics.
I know.
You make fun of me.
I do.
Paul, everything's your favorite topic.
I know. Paul, I did a podcast yesterday, and they asked me what my favorite episode was of Tremco Live, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to talk like Paul and say they're all my favorites. So,
which is true.
So I'm learning from you as well there. So, but we are excited today. We are talking about building enclosure commissioning, and we could probably talk for hours about this. So this will just be a little snippet and maybe more to come from our panel in terms of having us talk about it. So we are excited to have you all join us today. So type in your questions for them as we go through. We've already got some questions that were submitted online already. So thank you for sending those questions in. But without further ado, let's bring on our panels, right? So let's welcome on Melissa Payne, our Tremco Construction Management Specialist. We also have Brian Neely, the Senior Associate with Gale in the Building Enclosure Design and Consulting Group. And we have Adam Ugliza with Intertech, the Regional Manager with the Building Science Solutions and Building Construction Group. And I'm sure I butchered your name, Adam, I'm sorry. Adam Yu, can I just say Adam Yu? Adam Yu. And why don't we kick it off there with Melissa? Talk to me about your experience in the industry and with building enclosure commissioning, and we'll start to go through these questions that people submitted us. But go ahead, Melissa.
Sure. So I started off by representing an owner for about 17 years. And through that process, of course, we commissioned several buildings during construction. Once I was eligible to retire from there, I moved on and started doing forensic engineering. And that's when I decided to enter into the commissioning world, just simply because I felt that there was something that could be offered instead of going in and representing owners or even the design group and construction group under forensic work. And trying to, address any litigations that were going on and finding out why the failure was. I wanted to be a part of the solution and to help out with a better construction. And then now I am with Tremco, actually offering exactly that with all of our products and incorporating, design reviews as well as construction quality control as part of any of our projects for the full enclosure.
Absolutely, and working hand in hand with folks like Brian and Adam as part of that. So Brian Neely, welcome back to Tremco Live, of course. Talk to me about your experience as well as your history with building enclosure commissioning.
Sure, I started off on the design side before getting into more building enclosure forensics, dealing with water filtration and air filtration within buildings, both new and existing. And it's really the new ones that became a problem. Some of our clients were building new buildings 3-4 years old, and they were having more problems than they were with their older buildings that might be 100 years old. So that led us into kind of looking more at what is going on with the designs, what are some of the transitions and the problems that are occurring in new construction, and you're kind of getting into more of the what's essentially now building enclosure commissioning through design reviews, coordination with the contractors on site, and watching the installation and the testing.
Awesome. And Adam, welcome. Talk to us about your experience. I think we used to say that if we took care of our buildings like we took care of our cars, our buildings would be better. But I thought it was a funny story how we almost missed you on one of the Tremco Live episodes, because not that you weren't taking care of your car, but your car almost lost some juice.
I had a learning curve, electric car learning curve. Yeah, the mileage doesn't work very well in the cold. So if you get a new electric car, just be aware of that. Make sure you have adequate charge when you leave it and come back later. But anyway, yeah, I've been involved with commissioning for about 10 years now. Just being involved with building enclosure consulting just naturally drives you in that direction. So most owners, even contractors, and architects, they need a resource to help them with the design. And usually that eventually, even if it's a little consulting pieces, it starts with waterproofing, maybe it's a curtain wall, something, all of a sudden they realize that they really need somebody to look at the whole thing. And that's where commissioning comes in. It just all-encompassing process. It's more formalized for consulting of the entire building versus somebody just coming in and doing roofing consulting or waterproofing consulting. It's really getting the whole picture. So yeah, it's happening more and more. I mean, 10 years ago, commissioning was, everybody jokes around, calls it commissioning light, but it was very, very small scopes, and the industry was just sort of starting to understand it. Now, it's because of LEED and other things, it's really becoming something that's automatic on every project, whether it's the full commissioning scope or a GC just saying, hey, we need to have a building enclosure consultant on every job, mandatory, no question. So anyway, it's all great for building owners, and they can be sure that they don't have a leaky building, or a lot better position. So.
Well, and I think it's interesting, just as you mentioned, right, Paul, it's not like it's new, right? Commissioning has been something that's been around for a long period of time, but this is just a way to take that holistic approach, which is definitely needed.
Yeah, and it's great to hear hear you talk about that the awareness and the uptake on this is really accelerating. So that's great news, I think, for owners, and it's great news for Tremco.
Exactly, and I think there's true benefits for each of those customers that we face on a regular basis. Brian, why don't you talk to me a little bit about that? Like, what's that benefit to the owner with the building and commissioning process?
Sure. So one of the things we see with building enclosure commissioning is there's so many different people on the job site now, right? You have more than just one architect. You have they have multiple trades, and the contractors. Now you're not dealing with a GC, you're dealing with a CM and multiple subs who all have their own kind of priorities and directions. So building enclosure commissioning brings the enclosure designers and contractors kind of into the same pathway to make sure that everything is being followed from design through construction, to make sure that the final product is what the owner wants. Sometimes we still get those questions of, well, why do I need building enclosure commissioning? I have an architect and a contractor. They're supposed to provide it. Well, we know that doesn't always happen. And so this is a way that we can make sure that there's a process. And at the end of the day, the biggest cost to the owner is the building not being ready on time. So the cost of either additional rent or not getting in and not being able to open can be a significant cost. And so by making sure that the design doesn't have constructability issues, making sure that things aren't constructed in a manner that is now leaking, and now you have to figure out why it's not happening, make those repairs and fixes, it slows things down. So you want to be ahead of it, and having one person on site who's just responsible for looking at just the enclosure can be a significant benefit to a project.
Well, and it's interesting, right? Because if you're looking at your enclosure, and Adam, you touched on this too, you've got all these interfaces, right? I think one time I asked Paul, I'm like, how many connections do you think are on a standard building?
We decided it was tens of thousands,
right.
But even that might be low.
Right. So I think simply put, it's like somebody's responsible to make sure that there isn't a discontinuity in that enclosure, so that it's going to perform long term. Melissa, what about the GC, the general contractor? What role does he play in this building commissioning process?
So as far as the contractor goes, obviously, whenever you've got commissioning, there's additional tasks that they have to do. As part of that documentation of the process of construction, the commissioner will typically require the contractor to have certain forms that they can check, throughout construction. So commissioning does give us the opportunity to document the installation, to document and to verify and to test the building, to make sure that it meets the design intent, and most importantly, the owner's project requirements. So that OPR is very important. So when it comes to the CM or the GC on the project, they have to work hand in hand with the commissioner to make sure providing the correct testing and that those pass fails are corrected, obviously. And then they also document any deficiencies that might be there, and then pass that on from, you know, that testing of the mock-up to the pre-construction meetings, and then also to the pre-installation meetings. So the trades who are actually doing the installs know exactly what changes or any modifications that have been done, you know, in accordance to the, you know, what was required to get the proper performance as defined by the testing that was done. And I'm sure that these guys deal with that, you know, portion all the time. But one of the main things that we have seen with contractors who follow the commissioning process is that at the end of their project, they're not losing their profits because of rework that they're having to come back and do. Right. So, you know, those contractors truly do benefit from the process, even though it's a learning curve for them most of the time. At the end of the project, they really, you know, benefit from the process simply because they don't have to come back and deal with those leaks and deal with the rework that happens. Another thing that we've seen with the contractors and some of the benefits for them is that they end up not having as many leaks during construction, or even leaks, you know, that occur, you know, as a result of maybe some missed sequencing or transitions that may, you know, that should have been addressed. It gives them that opportunity to go through and identify all of those areas, and working hand in hand with the commissioner and the or any consultants and the architectural team to make sure that those details are actually continuous, and that all of the products are compatible and that they actually work together.
Well, I think that's what's interesting, because I think one of the misconceptions and one of the things that came in was, does commissioning, building enclosure commissioning, take more time? And I think you basically said you're going to meet up front where you can control the costs and get things handled so that they're not as costly later on in terms of rework. So that's a huge benefit for building enclosure commissioning. Adam, what, as a manufacturer, for any manufacturer listening, what's the benefit to the manufacturer, or what can a manufacturer do to benefit the building enclosure process?
To support it, you mean? I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of times we're leaning on. So when you're out there, you're looking at construction, you see a deficiency. There's ways to do things. You know, we know the proper way to do things. So when you have a detailed or a product data reference to support your position on something, it makes there's no argument anymore. So the more information from the manufacturer to support how this installation needs to go, how a transition needs to happen, it just clears up a lot of the arguments and discussions on site over what needs to happen and why something might have to be torn out and done right. So
involvement in the projects early on, making sure our directions are clear, concise, you know, all of that.
The other thing that I'm seeing a trend with is the support that you get from manufacturers tends to be individuals that aren't maybe as technically driven. They're more sales, and they don't always have the solutions that you need. So when you're settling a dispute over a detail, having somebody with that technical background to help you, you know, wade through how that particular issue needs to get handled. Having somebody from the manufacturer side that really understands their systems and what needs to happen is really helpful. Having somebody that's just there more of a sales role that kind of knows the technical information can sometimes muddy the water a little bit. So I would say more technical help in support, and then what we mentioned before is sort of that the compatibility thing and adhesion stuff. I mean, that is always something that comes up, and subcontractors just aren't good at tracking that information down. So, you know, you're forcing them to do compatibility matrix and submitting documentation, but they just don't get it. So it's having somebody that you can call and get that information from quickly would be another big benefit.
Absolutely. And I think that's why we continue to have subject matter experts. Compatibility and adhesion is probably a question we get every day. So we do a lot of work on that in terms of making sure we understand it, at least for the products that we represent, and as best we can from a chemical understanding as well.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, Marcy, is we're obsessive about doing our internal testing, and not just what I would call lab testing, but test to failure on the test wall and so on. So we've learned the hard way, especially over the last 15 years with our own in-house testing,
Yep.
how important it is to take it through test to failure.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Brian, who should be involved and when should they get involved?
The earlier you get involved, the better. You really want to be part of the selection process. Coming in, at the 10th, 11th hour is just a little bit too late. You can't make decisions. You can't really impact or change the details, and the system's already in place. So really coming in early, making sure that the initial selection of a window system or a wall system works correctly is important. We've been brought on, and you look at a set and it's 80%, you feel sorry, but you're like, this doesn't comply with NFPA 285, right? So how are you going to meet these code requirements that maybe the design team hadn't considered? So early is definitely the best. Who's included? It's usually anyone who's on the design team. So it may be not just the architect, but maybe the structural engineer, maybe a landscape architect if you're doing a green roof. It really can be anybody who's involved with anything on the exterior of the building. And then the CM, or if you have a design build type situation, or a fenestration contractor already on board to help do a design assist, those firms are going to be involved very early. And then as you get into construction, you will start adding on more and more subcontractors and trades who are involved in the exterior. And the manufacturer might be involved either early on helping the architect do design work, or they may be involved later on during the shop drawing process and doing mock-ups and samples on site. So it's pretty much everybody who's involved in the construction process. It depends on when they get brought in to get brought in onto it.
Well, it sounds like, once again, the earlier you're involved, the time you're going to save, right? Because if you aren't following, the building code and you need to change a product, that meets the criteria, you're going to have to go back to the drawing board, right? Make sure that that system meets it, or does something have to be tested? So all of those things will factor in as well.
Brian, is there such a thing as too early then, or better safe than sorry? Why not right from the start? Any comment on that?
So it is a fine line. You want to make sure there's enough information to be able to review, but the initial kind of services really shouldn't be very in depth. But you want to make sure the owner has understood it and listed what their requirements are going to be. So what are they looking for performance? At some point, everyone wants the best performance, but then you don't want to pay for it. So you have to find that happy medium between what's affordable versus what's the best I can get. So that could just be a quick, 3-4 hour meeting with everybody involved to figure out what is the performance requirements, and then later on looking at that basic design. What are the systems the architect's looking at? Making sure that the assemblies being chosen are matching up with what the performance requirements are that were listed and identified earlier. It can be very small hits. A lot of times the details don't come in until you get into more of a DD set later on in construction and the design process. So early is important, not waiting until you have CDs that are 80% complete. Even if that initial involvement may be infrequent at first, but it's important to have that say early.
Right, so your time commitment would adjust then as well.
Right. So I'm thinking from the very beginning, but light.
And then progresses on. So we'll go into lessons learned from your personal experiences on projects, advice that you could give to individuals getting involved. We'll start with Melissa. Any lesson learned you want to share?
Don't bring in the commissioner too late. If you're trying to do commissioning, honestly, if you're trying to do commissioning, and just to kind of tailor off of the last question, if you're trying to do commissioning, an owner should really requisition for that commissioner to come on board along with their design team, simply because that commissioner actually does assist with that process of building that OPR. So they come in at pre-design as far as the commissioner goes. If you're talking about all of the other parties that come, that come in on board, then you're looking at when is it important to bring those parties in. So, don't bring a commissioner in late. A building envelope commissioner is not the same as, like, let's say, a mechanical commissioning opportunity for an owner. The building envelope commissioning actually does begin at that design phase, because that's when we can really add the most value to the owner and be an advocate for the owner as a commissioner. That owner's OPR, based on what is their budget, what are they looking for, what is their facilities team saying that they want to do, with the maintenance of that building. Do they have a facilities team who's going to maintain that building? And trying to identify, okay, what is the long-term goal for that owner? That is part of that OPR. So bringing in a commissioning agent, during construction, then you're looking more at a building envelope consultant rather than a commissioner. And then the other item that I had, and I hope I'm not stealing this from the other guys, is that people confuse what commissioning is. They think that a commissioner is the police of the project, and that they're going to come in and, tell you what's wrong, look at the details, look at the installations, and tell you, what's wrong with that. What the commissioner is responsible for is to make sure that they are documenting and verifying throughout the entire design and construction process, not necessarily being the police of the project, if that makes sense. And they're to make sure that the design team and the construction team is following the owner's project requirements, and that the owner is getting the building that they've asked for at the end for the budget that they've asked for. So those are my 2 points.
That's great. And I love that, the whole idea of, what's involved at the end, or what's involved from a maintenance perspective, right? And all of those things are key parts of it. Adam, what about you? Lessons learned, advice, comments?
The one part that happen, or something that happens quite often, is the owner sort of disengages, and they just assume that everything's going to cruise on autopilot. I hired the commissioning agent, everything's good. The problem is, a lot of decisions have to come back to the owner to really, we call it laying the hammer down. Like, we give you the hammer, you just got to use it. So we can make a lot of comments, we can raise hell, but in the end, they really don't have to listen to us necessarily. It's just, so it's up to the owner to really enforce what we're saying, what our message is, and what our concerns are. And then, a lot of the time we're presenting levels of risk to them too. So they've got to make a lot of very important decisions. It's not just a hands-off experience. They've got to be involved. And so I would say lessons learned. I've had projects where they didn't pay attention, and you're picking up on things in design reviews. The same issue shows up in the shop drawing review, then you're seeing it installed improperly in the field, and then it leaks, and then they're asking what the hell happened. You're like, well, there's at least 4 occasions where I explained this to you, and nothing was done, and here we are. And they usually understand it, but it's too late. So I would say, just make sure, if you're an owner, schedule the time to check in with your commissioning agent and make sure everything's okay, and how things are going.
It's just interesting because, lately I'm on this Facebook group for my neighborhood, and people are asking, like, I need a plumber, I need an electrician. And they're always like, I need a, respectable plumber, electrician, whatever, at a reasonable price. Like, no one's I want the most expensive guy. Like, it's just kind of funny. Like, I want, your best recommendation at a reasonable price. So that just made me think of that. It just made me laugh. So, Brian, what about you? Lessons learned?
Oh, there's so many of them.
Yeah.
That's always the trick, right? So, a lot of the new buildings now are going to be part of an addition to an existing building. And so not understanding how the existing building, manages water is an important one. We got called in after construction on a project that we weren't involved with, and they were complaining that their first floor space, which was a glass box built in front of a existing wall, was leaking. And I'm like, well, no, it's not leaking. The wall's weeping right through the weeps of the throw flashing. It's because the addition, when they built up against the existing masonry veneer, they didn't intersect it with throw flashing. So the veneer was doing exactly what it was supposed to do. It was bypassing the roof and coming right down the brick cavity into the interior space. So, you know, those type of things of not understanding, not performing an existing conditions survey, and really knowing what's going on with the building. We looked at another project, which was a hospital. They were removing concrete panels that were precast on the building and putting a new addition with new curtain walls into that to let more light into a new space. Well, how does a curtain wall interact with a precast system, right? Precast, the barriers in the back of the walls, that double expansion joint between the precast panels, the curtain walls up in the front. It's the glazing and the glazing pocket. And trying to get those two things to meet can be very difficult, especially if you don't get involved early enough. So, you know, really understanding existing conditions if you're doing a rehab or an addition to an existing building is important.
Makes sense. It's good lessons learned. And just as you said, I think that's what we're going to see a lot more of, additions on existing buildings or retrofitting of existing buildings into new uses, and understanding existing performance is a key factor.
And they're also going, Brian, you see a lot of people going up on buildings too. I think that's becoming more and more of a trend as people are going up on top of what they already built. So that's got to present some interesting challenges.
Adding floors on, we just worked on a project that we actually added the skin outside of the existing skin because the building couldn't handle the additional load of a new veneer and a new insulation, a new air barrier to it. It's a 1950 structure and it just goes kind of maxed out. So we had to build a new steel frame around the building. So there's all sorts of things going on. Existing buildings may not be able to be emptied out, may be too expensive to land use to, you know, rip it down and build a new one. So you're going to be rehabbing these, and you're right, adding floors on top or trying to work out other options to improve what's existing is important.
Lots of great information you guys have shared so far. I know we could keep talking forever and ever. Is there a general resource or a place where somebody can learn more about commissioning that you guys would recommend?
What level of resource?
Right.
Real technical?
It's a loaded question, of course. I mean, obviously, if you go on to Gale Associates or Intertech's website, there's a lot of information on both of your websites as it relates to building enclosure commissioning. But isn't there also a conference that I know, Brian, you've worked on a lot of educational tools for a specific conference, and I think Melissa, you're part of that too.
Sure. I mean, the Building Enclosure Technology Group and National Institute of Building Science have a lot of information available. The whole building design guide that's online, which they also put together, has a lot of general information about the building enclosure. It has a whole section on commissioning, what should be included. There's several commissioning classes out there through NIBS and IBEC. I know there's a lot of abbreviations here, but IBEC also does the certification process, as does some college programs at the University of Wisconsin. So there's certainly a lot out there.
Lots of good resources. I know at Tremco, we're really dedicated to education. We're going to be working on an educational center in one of our buildings. We just launched Tremco University, so we're definitely looking for topics that we need to expand upon. And it sounds like training and education around testing and systems and technologies is a key part and something we definitely want to focus on as an organization. So final thoughts, guys. Any final thought you guys want to share? Call to action, something on your wish list that you'd want to get out there to the audience today? We'll let Adam go first this time, unless you want to go last.
I would say, the codes are progressing in this direction, but this is separate from commissioning. I mean, it can be a part of your project, it might not be, but I would say for an owner, you want to have a whole building air test done. And the reason why is it actually enhances the building enclosure commissioning process, because when contractors see that they've got to do a whole building air test, they really put more effort towards the details of the enclosure. It kind of forces that because they're afraid that they're going to fail the test. So if your commissioning scope is somewhat light, I would say that people are always trying to get, they're afraid of that test, but I'm telling you that ensures in a lot of cases, you're going to get a better building. So I would say it's separate from commissioning, but is often part of the commissioning process. But do yourself a favor and require it for your building, because it's going to help with all the different interfaces that we talk about and worry about with enclosure commissioning.
Craig Stevenson's, he's the guest that's coming on next week, and he talks about the free money that we lose every day if we don't have an airtight building, right? We're just losing the capability of being able to have a better, more efficient building, and having the whole building tightness test will help us get there for sure. So,
right. By default, when you're looking at details for airtightness, you're usually going to come up with a watertight solution as well. So it just comes along with it and just helps with making sure you get the performance you want. So a little trick. I would recommend that to anybody.
At a reasonable price, I hope.
Depends on what building size. But if you use a very strict leakage rate, which is what you want, the test is a lot cheaper. So don't use building code.
Brian? Yes, exactly. Building code's the start.
Building code is garbage.
Way above and beyond. Brian, what about you? Final thought?
You get a building enclosure consultant on board or commissioning agent on board early. Make sure that they're involved, and when questions of fee and reason to have that third party come up, I think you just need to talk to the architect and the contractor and understand that what's the cost of the contractor if things aren't done on time or if things have to be redone, and what's the cost to the owner if things are not provided to you at the the proper deadline. So I think anything that can help move that process forward, there might be a small upfront cost for it, but at the end of the day, the savings can be significantly a lot more.
Yeah, if you look at the schedule, cost to the schedule delays or the rework, already you're gonna see that benefit for sure. And Melissa.
So, obviously I'm wearing the Tremco logo today, so I have to kind of lean towards that and just say, work with your manufacturers. We have an entire program that is focused on specifically with owners, with the design team, and with the commissioning providers. So when you're looking at a commission project, make sure that you engage a manufacturer that can offer you the full enclosure. Now, obviously, we're going to promote that, on our end. But one of the things that I have seen, is that when the design team is trying to piece different manufacturers together, that's when you're dealing with that compatibility issue. Us being able to provide you with all of those services as far as, doing a design review alongside with the commissioning agent and or consultant, and then also working right alongside with the contractor to make sure that everyone's risks are being, minimized as part of construction, and us offering you the type of products that you're needing to attain the building that you're looking at. So I would urge you guys, as far as final thoughts go, is to, contact your manufacturers and obviously engage them. We're not the only manufacturer, so I'll just say that. We're not the only manufacturer that offers, all the different components in the enclosure. However, we have a program that is specifically tailored that does follow the commissioning process and makes this a lot easier for construction on behalf of the manufacturer.
Absolutely. Well said, well put. Thanks, guys. Lots of great advice. Maybe we'll check back in with you guys in a couple months, and we'll do part two of building commission and continue this discussion. Thanks, guys, so much for joining us today. Have a happy Friday and enjoy your weekend.
Awesome.